In addition to President Trump, fellow 2024 Republican hopeful Vivek Ramaswamy will be in Miami. The entrepreneur tweeted, "I will host a press conference tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. on the courthouse steps to discuss the politicized prosecution, his words, of the former president. I'll make another announcement there as well. If the captured media fails to do its job, real leaders in this country need to step up and do it instead. Principles over politics." And he is with us now. Welcome back to the show. We're glad to have you. I'm trying to figure this out because President Trump is your rival. You're running against him. Are you coming to his defense tomorrow, or are you saying that he did nothing wrong? What's your position on this?
My position on this is that this is an awful judgment by President Biden and the ruling party to prosecute a former president of the United States, especially on charges that appear to be actually as questionable as what's reflected in that indictment. The number of omissions in that indictment, Leland, are striking. I've laid this out elsewhere. The failure to mention the Presidential Records Act or judicial precedent in 2012, interpreting that act, giving the president sole authority to determine what records do and don't count. The fact that the classification standards were themselves set forth by executive orders, which don't bind future presidents. I could go on the legalities, but the fact that those were omitted in that indictment, to me, reeks of politicization. And I am worried that this sets a dangerous precedent in our country of the party in power weaponizing the federal police against its political opponents. So to me, this has less to do with Trump and more to do with that principle, and that's what I'm standing for.
All right, I understand the principle, I understand the argument, whether or not you agree or disagree with the decision to indict or not to indict and how politicized that was. Just purely from an election standpoint, right? Sure. We know that most Americans and even most primary voters don't want to talk about Donald Trump. They want to talk about issues affecting them. Here's Eric Erickson earlier today. Take a listen.
With due respect, I think it is shameful that I, as a competitor to President Trump in this race, have to ask questions that the media isn't asking. The job of the political media, if it has one job, is to hold the U.S. government accountable.
Yes, we know that.
And instead, we're doing the bidding. You're seeing the media doing the bidding of the U.S. government.
No.
Ask the question. Get to the bottom of what Biden told Garland and what Garland told Jack Smith.
More than two-thirds of Republicans don't want to hear about Donald Trump, including Trump supporters do not want to hear about Donald Trump. They want to hear about Biden and the Democrats and why they're bad. They want to hear about the economy.
All right, so that was Eric Erickson. They want to hear about the economy. They'd like to hear an economic message. They would like to hear about the future. They don't want to hear about the past. Can any Republican, Donald Trump, yourself, or anybody else, run by talking about effectively the past and how badly Republicans are being persecuted?
Well, I'm mostly running on a forward-looking message for this country. But if you want to take a day that the former president is indicted, I think that I have credibility as somebody who is competing against him to win this nomination to still say, yes, it's against my political self-interest. It would be easier if Donald Trump were not in this race. Make no mistake, my path to winning the primary would be easier. But still, we stand on the side of principle. Separately, you visit me on the campaign trail in New Hampshire, Iowa. The question for me is, what are we running to? I'm the only pro-growth candidate in this race. I believe that America can still be in our ascent if we treat it accordingly. But that doesn't mean that we're just going to have our eyes glaze over and ignore literally an unprecedented American historic moment, not in a good way, when a president of one party is arresting his lead political rival. No, I don't believe in just turning a blind eye to that just to stay on message, even though the core of my message, you're right, has nothing to do with Donald Trump or grievance for that matter. I think I'm able to distinguish the two, Leland.
You understand, though, that at some level, even if you are attacking Joe Biden for this decision, it looks like you are, in one way or another, at least sweeping under the rug or refusing to criticize President Trump, who, at least according to Bill Barr, his own attorney general, when you read the indictment, if what's in the indictment is true, at the very least, there's some really troubling things. Are you prepared to say that you think that President Trump did nothing wrong?
So I'll say two things. First of all, I don't yet believe anything that is in that indictment because it reeks of politicization. I'll wait till the court of law actually reaches its findings. However, if the allegations in that indictment really are borne out to be true, I think that is reflective of bad judgment. I would not have made those same judgments. Note, I am running for president of the United States because I would make different judgments than either of the two major contenders right now, Trump or Biden, in this race. But I also stand on principle. A bad judgment is not the same thing as breaking the law.
Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.